tornadoes across the southeast, coming a little bit further north because the air is so cold at the moment. Across the lakes area, eastern Canada, northeastern USA, there's snow to be had and a lot of rain to come into places like California, stretching up towards the Canadian border. A lot of heavy and thundery showers, 100 millimetres plus per day across the northern parts of South America, wet and windy in the far south, and close by to Buenos Aires, quite an active frontal system. Speaking of which, got exactly the same sort of thing all over the western side of Europe through Sunday for the very best of the warmth, 10 degrees above what we would expect there in the heart of Germany. See how extensive that dry and fine weather is. As we come to Africa, again, it's something of a split. Best of the fine, settled weather to the north or into the southwestern corner, but right through the heart, plenty of heavy and thundery downpours. Seen a lot of disturbed weather this week through the heart of Saudi. That's now just the remnants, one or two isolated showers. And where it's been so wet across the top end of the Gulf, that now beginning to move a little bit further east through Iraq and Iran. A lot of warnings out across the northern states of India. They're amber. Elsewhere, many states on yellow warnings for intense and thundery downpours. Some of those moving across the border into Pakistan, some moving across the border and into Bangladesh. Very active frontal system has introduced quite a lot of cold air across this northeastern quarter of Asia. Temperatures beginning to recover in Beijing. They'll continue that process in the next few days. And finally to Australasia, where we've still got the remnants of Iris producing some wet and windy weather across the far northeast. There's heat to be had further to the south and east, and wet weather gradually working its way into South Island, New Zealand, with drier conditions further north.
Which stories matter this week? Who's shaping the news around the world? If you're the President of the United States, then your words move markets. The whole world is confused right now with what he's going to do.
Find out on Newsnight. Are you saying there is literally only one way of leaving the European Union? There are no choices whatsoever.
Documentary, analysis and interviews. Is it possible that your commanders don't always know how many civilians are in the houses around about? On BBC World News.
The English Premier League is in full flow, and you need to make sure you don't miss out. You can keep up to date on TV, online, and with the BBC Sport app, with features including the latest gossip, score predictor, personalised push alerts, and guides to all the upcoming action. Wherever you are in the world and whatever you're doing, football is for all of us. On BBC World News, the BBC Sport website, and the BBC Sport app.
This is BBC World News. I'm David Eads, and these are the headlines. A bus carrying a junior ice hockey team crashes in Canada. 14 people are dead. Brazil's former President Lula is negotiating his surrender just hours after a police deadline for him to go to jail expired. At least 14 people are reported to have been killed in Canada in a crash between a bus and a truck. On board the bus was the Humboldt Broncos ice hockey team with players ranging in age from 16 to 21. Well, the crash happened in the province of Saskatchewan. According to a message from the club's president on Twitter, it occurred near Tisdale as the team were travelling north to Nipawin for a Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League playoff game. Well, the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has expressed his condolences. He put out a tweet saying he could feel the grief of the parents of children caught up in the accident, and his heart went out to everyone affected by what he called a terrible tragedy. Ryan McNally is a reporter for the radio station CKRM, which is based in Regina, Saskatchewan. I asked him what the reaction had been in the province.
It's pure shock right now across the province. A good 1.1 million people are all really feeling for a community of about 7,500 people that lost their junior hockey team. What many people don't understand across the globe is how important hockey is to not only Canada, but the smaller centers in Saskatchewan, especially. For many communities, this is all we have. And it feels like our hearts have been ripped out with a junior hockey team that, like 14 of whom have passed away.
Right. I mean, you give a good impression as to the scale of the sport, what it means to Canadians right across the country, of course. In terms of the accident itself, Ryan, is it clear? I mean, do people know what really happened?
It's really... We haven't really received anything from the RCMP at this point as to what has officially happened, but there are a lot of reports that say the semi-truck did run a stop sign and then collided with the team bus, which then, of course, led to the collision itself, and the players and coaching personnel and radio personalities. I do know of a radio play-by-play guy that was on that bus as well. And,
right. Yeah. Some of the already the messages coming through help to give a sense of the emotion that is running clearly high, and I think you're doing that as well in your own voice. Really, can you give us some indication? The Humboldt Broncos as a club, where do they stand in the landscape of ice hockey in Canada?
Well, to tell you the truth, I started my career in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, and so they may not seem important to the grand scheme of things in hockey. They're no NHL club. They're no major junior club. A lot of these players don't end up playing professional hockey, but it's really the importance of the small-town fan.
Ryan McNally there from Saskatchewan. The former president of Brazil, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, has spent the night at a union building defying the deadline set by a court for him to surrender to police. His supporters have surrounded the building as negotiations between his lawyers and the authorities to suspend the court order against him go on. Lula was sentenced to 12 years for corruption, although he says the charges against him are politically motivated, as Katie Watson reports from Sao Paulo.
A criminal or a saviour? To his supporters gathered outside the Metalworkers Union, the answer was clear. As the deadline loomed, the crowds got bigger. 5 o'clock came and went, and the party got louder. Chanting Lula's name, the crowd said they wouldn't give up the fight to keep him out of jail.
Lula was the best president we ever had. I'm from the Northeast, and Lula was able to feed people there with his social welfare policies. Today, nobody goes hungry anymore in the Northeast.
For hours we were told Lula would address the crowds, but nothing. Instead, his party faithfuls stepped in.
Here we are, with the world looking at us. Everyone is watching us closely monitoring this situation that threatens our democracy.
This is uncharted territory here in Brazil, a country known for its soap opera politics. This perhaps its most dramatic chapter.
It felt less dramatic, perhaps, at the federal police headquarters in Curitiba, where officers were standing by for his surrender. Despite the no-show, his opponents turned out to make their views heard. Lula, thief, you belong in prison, said this demonstrator.
We're here to prevent another convict from getting sick and being unable to serve his sentence. He can't get away with it. He can't make fun of us.
From the very start, this trial has divided Brazil. Lula, his lawyers and his supporters have claimed it's politically motivated, designed to get him out of the race for the presidential elections in October. His critics say they just want justice. He needs to serve time for his corruption conviction. But how that happens, through peaceful negotiation or confrontational arrest, is what everyone here is watching. Katie Watson, BBC News in Sao Paulo.
Members of the U.S. National Guard from Texas and Arizona are being deployed to the border with Mexico. Texas is sending 250 troops, Arizona planning to deploy 150 of the reserve military force. Mr. Trump said he wants up to 4,000 of them on the border until his wall there is built, which is proposed to stop illegal immigration.
This deployment has begun with the movement of equipment and troops today. Within 72 hours, the Texas Military Department will have 250 personnel, along with ground surveillance vehicles, as well as light and medium aviation platforms.
Some other stories for you from around the world now. Russia's foreign ministry has warned that there will be a tough response to new US sanctions on businessmen, companies and government officials close to President Putin. The White House says it's targeting those involved in what it called malign activity around the world, and their assets in the US can now be frozen. Scotland Yard is deploying 300 extra officers in areas of London that have been worst affected by a recent increase in violent crime among young people. 6 people have been killed in the city in the past 7 days, more than 50 since the start of the year. Facebook has announced that anyone placing political adverts on its network will have to state who is paying for them. Under the new rules, those posting such ads will also have to verify their identity and their location. The company's chief executive, Mark Zuckerberg, said he wanted to make it harder for fake news to be shared. Earlier, I spoke to Tom Claiborne, reporter on The Register, and asked him if this announcement was to tie in with the showdown that Mr. Zuckerberg may well have with Congress next week.
He's going to have quite a bit to answer for, and I think that it will be a very closely watched hearing. The steps that they're taking obviously need to be taken, but it's a very small step that for a much larger problem that I don't think will be solved just by adding a little bit more attention to verification. I mean, the whole sort of system here it has very little accountability, and just adding a few checks to identification for people signing up for accounts isn't going to address the entirety of the problem.
I'm interested you say that, because does that suggest from your view that the verification, finding out the identities, would still itself be some sort of screen to who is really behind it? Because if you do know who these people are, you have a much better idea as to what's going on.
Well, I think it certainly will help, and it throws a speed bump in the way, but finding out who's behind, businesses is a pretty broad problem. And you have shell companies where, people are very capable of masking the identities of people who are pulling the strings. And I think that it will be perfectly plausible to think that people will take that Facebook's new rules as a challenge and figure out a way around them.
Tom Claiborne there. Now, we've got a bit of breaking news for you after a fashion. Christians on the Greek island of Corfu celebrating the Orthodox Easter holiday in their own style. Thousands of them gathered to see the tradition of crockery and giant clay pots smashing. They fill them with water, throw them off the balconies, and then send them down into the streets below and have great fun doing it. I think it's fair to say. That is BBC World News. Thanks for watching.
Hello once again, just time to update you on the weather prospects for Europe for the next few days or so, and of course we're going to focus pretty much on the weekend to start with, which will be pretty wet and windy, it has to be said, anywhere from Iberia up through the western side of France, the Low Countries to the British Isles, because here we've got a frontal system which really isn't moving very far, very fast. It's pretty much aligned with the direction of the wind flow, and that's never a great encouragement to move things on. Then things are really quite quiet and warm across the heart of continental Europe. And then looking further towards the southeast, where you've had so much in the way of wet weather, thankfully at last, just in time for the weekend, there's some sunshine and some spring warmth to be had as well. That won't be the case in Madrid, for example, or indeed in Lisbon, and looking away towards Barcelona on the edge of the action there. But look at the temperatures here. heart of Germany, 20, 21, 22 degrees or so. That's about 10 degrees above what we would expect at this time of year. Italy faring quite nicely as well, although you'll notice there's quite a wind there coming up through the western shores. But although the orientation is just changing slightly in that frontal system out towards the west, with Iberia beginning to pop into something a little bit more like sunshine and showers, it stays pretty unsettled, no doubt about it. You have to be in the heart of the continent to see the very best of the conditions. And as a consequence, those temperatures, for example, in places like Moscow, just ticking up come Monday.
My name is Joy Ajaloni, and I'm one of the founders of a tech company here in Dubai. When they said that we're going to establish Fetcher in Dubai, I was excited about it because the whole energy behind Dubai is that come here and build it here, and we will help you succeed. People from all over the world who are here for the same reason, to make their dreams happen. It forces you to be the best you. We're here for a reason. We're here to create something and to do something with our lives, which is amazing because Dubai is built on that.
Southeast Asian taxi app drive global giant Uber out of this region. For Singapore-based Grab's founder Anthony Tan, this is just the beginning. So what's his grand vision? We speak to him on the first episode of Asia's Tech Titans on BBC World News.
Now on BBC World News, join us for a weekly showcase of the best reports from the BBC's network of correspondents around the globe.
Martin Luther King said there were two Americas. One was white, overflowing with the milk of prosperity. The other, black, a lonely island of tea and brutality. 50 years after his death, are those two Americas any closer to being reconciled?
To the flag of the United States of America.
On the face of it, little's changed at the Martin Luther King Elementary School in the Midwestern city of Milwaukee. 98% of the pupils are black, reflecting the demographic of the local area. So while segregation is now illegal in education, it happens anyway.
With liberty and justice for all.
Fine words, but Milwaukee is the most segregated city in America, where there isn't liberty and justice for all. The north and west are mainly black, the south and east mainly white. In the affluent suburbs, postal workers, most frequent black visitors. Academic Mark Levine has written extensively about the racial divide here.
Milwaukee, in terms of the level of segregation in the town, is precisely the same as it was 50 years ago. A black household making $100,000 a year has about a 20 times greater possibility of living in a concentrated poverty neighborhood than a white family.
And it's not just in housing that America remains a land divided, half a century after Dr. King had a dream. 50 years ago, the unemployment rate was 6.7%. In 2017, 7.5%, still roughly twice the rate of whites. And 50 years ago, just over 40% of black people owned homes, about the same rate as today. Yet 70% of whites are homeless.
They've been taking everything we had, but now we showing them we ain't faded them no more.
Housing has always been a racial fault line in America. Black people have so often been denied the right to live where they want or refused loans for homes. In 1967, thousands marched for fairness in Milwaukee.
They're gonna let me buy ya. Turn us around.
And these people were some of the protesters, demonstrating on this bridge the divide between black and white in the city.
Walking up the freedom land. The white people with their children and everybody else had bricks and bottles. Name calling, there was All kinds of things would happen by the time you got to the end of that bridge.
Old newsreels help jog memories of their sacrifice.
That's our mother.
That's your mother
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's my dear mother.
But how much do they think things have changed in America?
Milwaukee has become more tolerant in where they place the blacks, but they're still doing the same thing. They're segregating us, putting us into different areas, though.
I don't care how much money you got, what you got, they're looking at this.
Right.
But some are fighting back. A non-profit organization, the Milwaukee Fair Housing Council, has undercover researchers who investigate landlords over racism. I met two of the researchers, one black, one white, who went to the same landlord looking for a flat.
They were very, very accommodating to me.
They were keen.
Oh, yeah. I was told there's nothing available and come back later. I subsequently went back about a week later and was told nothing was available.
That was it?
That was it. It's really disheartening to me because it's a something, for me, of something that's really sick in this society. No matter what I've accomplished, no matter what my station in life, I'm reminded that I'm a black person living in America.
Dr. King wanted these children to achieve their American dream, and he wanted this country to find its soul. While the evil of inequality pervades, he remains a voice of anguish for millions.
For many of where Brazil's gone wrong. Soldiers on the streets of Rio trying to keep the city safe from rising violence. For presidential hopeful Jair Bolsonaro, public security is top of the agenda. He warns in this video that Brazil risks becoming the new Venezuela. It's just one of hundreds of videos on the right-wing politician's Facebook page, which has more than 5 million followers. He's been accused of being homophobic, he's anti-abortion, and believes Brazilians should be armed. Nicknamed Brazil's Trump, his fans love him.
He's the only one who is literally worried about the public security. I know it sounds really awkward, but really, if any woman could read the law projects of Bolsonaro, she will be loved, like me.
Right-wing groups are finding big audiences. The Free Brazil movement, or MBL in Portuguese, started through protests, calling for Dilma Rousseff to be impeached.
É o jeito como você vai passar essa mensagem.
Their critics accuse them of being too conservative, but the self-styled libertarian pressure group says their supporters want change.
People that are consuming this culture produced by the establishment, they don't identify anymore with what is being handed to them. And now because of the internet, they can find their own voice and they can find their own values back again. And that's what's happening. And that's why we have Trump, that's why we have Brexit, that's why we have MBL, that's why we have this common people's voice being heard.
Since it started in 2014, the Free Brazil movement has grown massively. But it doesn't just want to be a protest movement. From the conversations that are going on here, it's clear that it wants to change the direction of politics in this country too. Fernando Holliday is an unusual poster boy for the right. A member of the Free Brazil movement, he was the youngest ever person to be voted as city councillor in Sao Paulo. He comes from a poor family and is gay. He thinks young Brazilians had, until recently, become disengaged with politics.
Aqui no Brasil, a direita ficou durante muito tempo associada a
The right became synonymous with more conservative politics, irrelevant for minorities. But I think we bring a wider vision of what the right is. We are in favor of gay marriage, but I'm against legalization of drugs and abortion. Not everything fits into a standard box and is determined by rigid rules.
Experts say Brazil's corruption scandals have been fertile ground for this kind of politics.
Politicians, judiciary, police officers, and army. So you have a total mistrust of every kind of authority in Brazil. This type of movements that creates propagates the hell, that shows that everything is wrong. It's very, very useful for them, this type of scenario.
Politics here is deeply polarised, and October's presidential elections the most uncertain in decades. Katie Watson, BBC News in Sao Paulo.
It's 5 in the morning, but Teresa Danks is already teaching.
When you do good today, you're going to get a gold star, all right?
Her student is halfway across the world, in China.
B. Yes, out.
She makes better money teaching him than she does in a classroom here, in the richest nation on earth.
You get a star, you get a star. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States.
Only the furniture in this room is provided by the state. Everything else is paid for by the teacher herself.
So we're going to go to chapter 2.
Mrs. Danks says she's angry, disgusted and embarrassed. She's even resorted to begging for money for supplies on a street corner.
Our education system has failed, at least in the state of Oklahoma, and it is failing a lot of places across the United States. It is failing our children. We are begging for our voices to be heard as teachers. We are begging for change. We are begging for a pay raise. We're begging for the state of Oklahoma to put education as a priority for the future of our state and this nation.
A pay raise has now been approved, but teachers walked out today anyway, marching on the state capitol. They say the increase of around 15% is a drop in the bucket after a decade of deep and damaging tax cuts.
I will see you next week, Hope.
They're feeling those cuts here at Crutchow Elementary, which is now open just 4 days a week to save money on buses, electricity and support staff. It isn't enough, though.
I think our kids are missing our art class we used to have. We used to have a really cool art program, but we don't have the funding for it anymore. We used to have choir, like all sorts of music. We used to have band. I would love a school nurse. I would love a full-time counselor.
Modest tax rises on oil and gas production, fuel and cigarettes are now in the pipeline, but critics say it's too little, too late. Oil-rich Oklahoma is not the first state to implement deep tax cuts. Neighboring Kansas tried it too, and also ran into trouble. But now, even some Republicans here say it's time to admit that this experiment has failed. We travelled out into the heartland to meet one of them. Gary Jones is running for governor of Oklahoma, the only candidate in favour of raising taxes.
Well, it seems like everything we do in Oklahoma lately is just a crisis.
It's part of a Republican creed to believe in smaller government and lower taxes. But is it your feeling that you can go too far with that?
I think so, and it's got to be a balance. You know, while we believe smaller, more efficient also means that you deliver those core services that government is expected and required to do.
Some Republicans here worry that President Trump is repeating their mistake with deep national tax cuts. If so, say his critics, the US faces not optimism and renewal, but decay and despair. James Cook, BBC News, in Oklahoma.
Copenhagen, and it's pretty cold outside. But inside a university lab, there's a place that's even colder.
Well, if you look right up here on this gauge, you'll see that the inside of that refrigerator is sitting at 0.03 of a degree above absolute zero. That's 100 times colder than deep space. This may be the coldest place in the universe.
And this is why embedded in this chip is a qubit, the building block for the computer of the future, which will only work under these extreme conditions. Microsoft is working with scientists here and around the world to build a quantum computer. They're confident they're about to make a major breakthrough. If they succeed, there's a huge prize.
Quantum really represents a giant leap forward from today's technology. We can begin to solve problems that would take us today more than the lifetime of the universe to solve in seconds, hours, or days.
So, how does a quantum computer work? Drill down into a conventional computer and you'll find the bit, the basic unit of information, which is either a 0 or a 1. Think of it as a switch which is either on or off. But at the heart of a quantum computer is the qubit. And the magic here is that it can be both 1 and 0 at the same time. The switch can be both on and off. This supercharges any computer program, making impossible problems easy to solve. We could find answers to climate change, make rapid progress in artificial intelligence, and break encryption. Secure codes would be simple to crack. First, though, there are huge challenges in creating qubits stable enough to be useful in a commercial quantum computer. Microsoft thinks it's got a unique way of doing that.
By making a better qubit to begin with, you'll need fewer of them to build the full quantum processor.
But there's stiff competition. Google, IBM, and scientists in labs like this one in London are all making breakthroughs, and so far they've made faster progress.
So Microsoft is starting further behind. They're still trying to demonstrate a single qubit. But their approach is unique. Its qubits may be much better protected against errors. So if they get their one qubit to work, they could leapfrog these other approaches quite quickly.
Back in Copenhagen, they're confident they're on the verge of a breakthrough which will lead to a commercial quantum computer within 5 years. If that's true, and it's a big if,
tornadoes across the southeast, coming a little bit further north because the air is so cold at the moment across the lakes area, eastern Canada, northeastern USA. There's snow to be had and a lot of rain to come into places like California, stretching up towards the Canadian border. A lot of heavy and thundery showers, 100 millimetres plus per day across the northern parts of South America, wet and windy in the far south, and close by to Buenos Aires, quite an active frontal system. Speaking of which, got exactly the same sort of thing all over the western side of Europe through Sunday for the very best of the warmth, 10 degrees